Thank you for joining me for the study in the book of Revelation. Prophetic patterns and parallels for today. We're in chapter 12, a little over halfway. If you feel like that you've been a part of this study forever, well, it kind of feels that way, doesn't it? The book of Revelation is 22 chapters long and certainly not the longest book in all the Bible, but it has a lot of material, and the material is mystical. It's not mythical, certainly not mythical. Mystical, is that the word I'm looking for here? It's mystery. Yeah, mystery, not mythical, mystery, mystical. I think that's the word I'm looking for. Let me get my YouTube thing going here better. That's pretty good. I am very thankful that you are going with me in this journey, because I'll tell you what, it's deep stuff. And your comments mean the world to me, and I am grateful for that. And I've already got two of you that's chimed in here. Cindy, thank you so much down in Louisiana. Greg and your family, thank you so much all the way up in there in Maryland. I appreciate you so very much. Probably my buddy from India will be tuning in here in just a moment. So we got a lot of folks from a lot of different places, a lot of different perspectives. It helps me. Give me your comments. Let me know. Some of what I'm going to say tonight is, again, one of those kind of controversial moments. I'm going to preface it by telling you, I don't know. I'm just telling you, at this point in my maturity, this is where I'm at with this, okay? Hi, Mom. Praying for all your aches and pains. I appreciate you so much for joining me, Mom and Dad. All right, here we go. Revelation chapter 12, beginning at verse 7. No, not 7, because as you know, we got to review, right? We got to see where we come from in order to see where we're at. So we'll get to verse 7. That's new material. But before we go there, let's review where we've been, okay? A great sign appears in the heavens. You remember that's the pregnant woman, okay, which is no doubt Mary or Israel, however you look at that. Israel is probably a better way of looking at it because of the symbolism that's going on here. And then there's going to be a second sign that's going to appear in the heavens, the great dragon. And the great red dragon is, of course, Satan himself. The dragon is going to stand before the woman, hoping that as soon as she gives birth to this child, that the dragon can consume the child, destroy the child. But the child is caught up to God, and the woman is taken away into the wilderness, where she will stay for 1,260 days. All right. I told you last time that there are three conflicts that are taking place in this section of Scripture. There's the dragon versus Christ, which we're seeing right now. The woman, and she gives birth, and then the dragon's trying to consume the woman, etc. Okay, so you got the dragon versus Christ. Then you got the dragon and versus heaven, which we're going to spend most of our time talking about in this lesson. And then you got the dragon versus the church. This is the controversial part, because I believe the church does show up in chapter 12. And I believe it's pretty vivid that it does. And I'll get to that in just a moment. In fact, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that in this particular class and in the next. Greg says that Dylan and Ashley are there too. Thank you guys for joining me for Bible study. I love you and I appreciate that. All right, so that's where we've come from. All right, that we've got these two sides. We covered this idea of the dragon and Christ. Now we're going to move into the second of the conflicts, the dragon in heaven. But before we do that, I want to show you, for those of you who are part of the School of Biblical Studies, here are the 6 questions for this particular lesson. And so that's the text that we're going to look at, verses 7 all the way down to verse 12. But here are the 6 questions. I do that ahead of time because I know a lot of you like to maybe take a picture of that, and then as I'm covering the material, you like to answer it so that you got your answers as you go along, which I think is a brilliant way of doing it. All right, you got that? Here we go. All right, so as we then begin moving into verse 7 and we begin picking it apart, keeping in mind that it's a flowing thought, we are now into the second part of these 3 conflicts. The first one was this dragon waiting to devour Christ. He does not, but that was the conflict, okay? The second then of the conflicts is the dragon versus heaven. Now, war arose in heaven. And so you would imagine that for the second conflict. So war is going to take place in heaven. And I think it's interesting that Michael, the archangel Michael, is going to lead his forces against the angels that are in the dragon's forces, the great red dragon, who is Satan himself. That's going to be defined here later on. And the dragon, they're going to fight at each other, okay? And the dragon will be defeated, and they'll find that there's no longer any place for them in heaven. That's a significant phrase, and we'll show you why here in just a second with well, there it is right now, actually, okay, in the book of Job. There was no place left for him in heaven. Now, I want to come to this word now. Here's the Greek word for now. And usage, you could translate it and, even, also, namely. The idea is to connect the two contexts, okay? And so in succession, what you see in the vision, or John saw in the vision, was he saw this dragon waiting to consume the child of the pregnant woman, which is Israel, Mary. The child is delivered, but he doesn't devour the child. The child is caught up to God. Mary, or Israel, runs off into the wilderness, okay? And there is protected for 3.5 years in the wilderness, okay? Now, so the next scene in this drama, the now is, okay, we're in the heavenlies, and we've got this battle raging between Michael and the good angels and Satan and the bad angels, okay? I believe that the conflict in heaven leads to the conflict between the dragon and the church, which I'm going to show you here in just a moment. You'll notice I got 2 red lines here, because I think what's happening is you got this conflict in heaven that Michael and the dragon are going to have, and then we're going to see that Satan and his angels are going to be cast out down to earth, but we're going to see that those who are on the earth are going to be able to conquer him through the blood of the Lamb. That sounds like a Christian to me. And through the word of their testimony, right? So I just think that's the church. But hold that thought for just a moment, because we'll leave the controversial part here for the end, okay? As we come back to this now, I want to give you what I think are 2 time frames with regards to Satan and where Satan is at, what Satan is doing, that kind of thing. As you study the book of Job, chapter 1 and verse 6, that just the entire chapter would suffice, but specifically when you get to verse 6, there's something that happens that I've always thought is rather unique. At this particular time in history, Satan evidently has access to the throne room of God. It says, now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. So Satan's going to show up, and there's going to be this conversation between Satan and God, which essentially leads to the downfall of Job in the physical sense, not in the spiritual sense. It's interesting also in that context that Job is made a point of, but it's God who brings Job up at the front end of this thing. It's not Satan who says, yeah, but that Job guy. It starts with God. God says, have you noticed my servant Job? And I think that there's an application, a huge application for you and I with regards to the book of Revelation, where we are at, present tense, etc. And that is, what if God needs you to go through difficult times in order to prove to the angelic realm, and maybe to Satan himself and to others, that God is God and he has faithful? Job was that man, this champion of the Old Testament. Did he have his weak moments? Absolutely. Did he have a lousy wife? You know that's true. And did he have lousy friends? Yeah, gave lousy advice. All of that is accurate. But Job hung in there with God. Though he slay me, yet will I trust him, says Job, middle chapters. And so Job hangs in there with God, and because of that great victory, difficult as it was, no doubt moments of great doubt, you see that throughout the book of Job, but you see that God and Job, they're tight. And because Job hangs with God all the way through, his story is one of the most ancient stories we have in all of the Bible, and his story has lasted. Well, what if you and I were called to do the same? What if during the tribulation, the great tribulation, whatever, what if you and I are called upon to have that same level of faithfulness to show to the world that God's people can withstand? I get weary of everybody who's constantly throwing at me. They start with this idea there's got to be a pre-trib rapture. They start with that conclusion. It has to happen. And I think it sometimes is drawn from the escapism kind of a mentality. I want it to happen, therefore it has to happen. And so because they start with that conclusion, then they also add other conclusions onto a conclusion that's not really a conclusion at all. It's not something that's proven. It's something that they have assumed, but they add other conclusions on top of it, such as the church doesn't show up in the middle chapters of the book of Revelation. Therefore, this is not talking about the church. This is talking about others who were converted during the tribulation, whatever, but it's not talking about the church, because we know the church is already gone. Do we? I think that there's a good reason why God might allow the church to suffer through some of the tribulation, and it's simply because of his pattern throughout history. He has throughout history allowed some of his people to suffer in great, great, great ways. And as we suffer through these things, it is possible, even with regards to the judgment of God coming down upon a nation or coming down upon a people, it is possible for God's people to be sheltered from within, yet still have to experience or go through that tribulation process. We know that's true from the story of the Old Testament, where we got the death angel passing over God's people because they were sheltered from within, but they still had to pass through that very dark valley with the rest of the world. I get weary with those who have a conclusion, and then they just twist and they turn and they make themselves into a pretzel to make sure that their pre-conclusion is accurate. I think it's possible that the church, you and I, might have to suffer through some of the tribulation. But my question is, will we be a Job? Or will we be Job's friends? Or maybe worse, his wife? Why don't you just curse God and die? Will we hang in there? Will we have the testimony? One of the grandest opportunities for the bride of Christ is to show her loyalty to the bridegroom, to Jesus. And perhaps the tribulation, at least part of it, is going to give us that grand opportunity to show our loyalty. If that's true, it's also true that there's many folks who have claimed the name of Jesus who do not have the spinal fortitude to hang in there with Jesus, and they're going to go by the wayside. Great falling away, all of that. But there'll be a remnant. And that remnant's going to shine like Job. That remnant is going to be so precious. Yes, I think it's possible that the church shows up in the middle chapters of the book of Revelation. I think this is one of those examples that could show that. Now, back to the time frames. It seems to me that before Jesus' ministry and death, that Satan evidently had access to the throne room of God. He is the great accuser, as we'll see even in this text, and the great deceiver. And so he is able to go, and in that conversation, you read chapter 1, but you know the conversation. He's going to basically say to God, after God points out Job, proud of my boy Job, have you considered my boy Job? And then Satan is going to say, yeah, but it's because you keep a hedge around him. You keep your hand over him, and you're sheltering him. And God then gives permission for Satan to do what he wants to Job, physically speaking, okay? But you're not allowed to take his life. And it's a really tough time. Job comes out the other end shining like a wow, but it's a tough time getting there. Imagine the beauty that is in that if you and I had to go through. I'm not asking God to put me through that ringer, but I am saying, wow, that's quite a testimony, isn't it? Prior to Jesus' ministry and death, it seems that Satan had access to the throne room of God. After his ministry and death, or because of, maybe I should say that, because of, during the process of his ministry and his death, we find this taking place. This is, of course, before his death, but the 72 have returned. Jesus sent them out, and they returned, and they're all excited because he said, Lord, even the demons are subject to us in your name. Verse 18, and Jesus is going to say to them, I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. Is that this? Is that the now that we are seeing and going to have described here in just a moment? I think it likely that it is. I don't think that this account in Revelation chapter 12 is actually talking about the original fall of Satan. I think that when Satan comes in among the sons of God here, I think that he had already fallen. I think that what's happening in this passage is that Satan is now coming down in a more forceful, intensified manner upon the kingdom of the world. And he's no longer going to have access to the throne room of heaven to make his accusations. And you know why? Because his accusations are conquered by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony of God's people. I want to be those people. But to continue that thought, let's back up one little bit, and then we'll tie into that further. And the dragon and his angels fought back, and he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them. And so at some point, God pushes him out of the heavenlies and out of the position to actually come before God himself. And Satan is banished. He's no longer able to come before the throne of God. I am of the personal opinion that in this particular situation, his banishment, he can't even bring accusation successfully against God's people because he's not able to appear in that setting. Here is where we have two references to this idea of God taking judgment upon Satan and his angels. If God did not spare the angels, when they sinned, but cast them into hell. Okay, Jude 6. There's only one chapter. Jude verse 6. And the angels who did not stay within their own positions of authority, but left their proper dwelling, he kept in eternal chains. They were thrown out. Okay, so there's two references to this whole idea of the dragon, Satan, fighting with Michael and the good angels, and they are cast out. There's no longer any place for them. They can no longer come directly before the throne of God. Now, as you move further into this, then, notice how Satan is going to be defined. And the great dragon was thrown down, the ancient serpent. That sounds like what we had in the Garden of Eden, doesn't it? The ancient serpent, who is called the devil, another word that we have, and Satan. We're going to define that name here in a moment. And then he's called the deceiver of the whole world. As you flip down further into the context, he's also going to be called the accuser of our brothers. The deceiver, the accuser. That's interesting that it would say that, because returning to Job chapter 1, you got more of the story here. You have this idea of Job being the topic of discussion between God and Satan. Now, there was a day that came before him, Satan, I'll get to that B here in just a moment, also came on the, and he said, Lord, where did he come from? Satan answered, I've been going to and fro throughout the Lord said, hey, have you considered my servant Job? I'm proud of this guy. And then Satan is going to answer the Lord. He's going to say, yeah, but does Job fear God for no reason? Have you not put a hedge around him? You're protecting him. You bless the works of his hands, his possession and greed, but have stretched out your hand, but stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. In other words, let me get after this guy. Let me tempt him. And I promise you, God, I'll make him turn on you. That seems to be the position of Satan in the past. He was able to come before God and say to God, yeah, but that one there, if you just give me a moment with him, I'll turn that one. And in Job's case, God, of course, allows Satan to do a lot of tempting and horrible things. And Job is going to man up underneath that load. Okay. And of course, we appreciate that. But I want to come back to this B here. Satan, that's a footnote in the ESV. If you go down and you were to study that, this is what it's going to say. In the Hebrew, that means the accuser or the adversary. The accuser, the adversary. And so what we have here is we got the great dragon, who is no longer able to come, because he's being cast out of heaven, no longer able to come directly before the face of God in his accusations. Okay. And so he's got to do all his dirty work down here. Now, we're going to be cursed to have him down here. Okay. But he's going to limit his dirty work to down here. Continue reading on here, so make sure we get it all. And I heard a loud voice. He's thrown down to the earth. The angels were thrown down with him. Okay. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power of the kingdom of God and the authority of Christ have come. We're in that moment. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before God. And they have conquered him. How? By the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. Let's come back and get that. I guess I don't. What is that? I don't have it underlined. For they conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. That sounds like the church to me. Who is cleansed by the blood of the Lamb? Christians. Who goes about speaking the testimony of Jesus Christ? Christians. That sounds like the church to me. And so it sounds to me like in chapter 12, we got the church showing up here in this grand conflict. When I say grand, I'm not saying grand in the sense of a happy. I'm just talking about a great conflict. That we got the church showing up, and that leads me to my third point. And this, by the way, is going to continue the thought into the following context, which we'll have to see next time. But you got the dragon, Satan, and his conflict with the church. And these are folks who are conquering by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of the testimony. And then there's this wonderful, wonderful phrase, for they love not their lives even unto death. That's reminiscent of the souls under the altar crying out, how long is it not? We have them in a position where they are so loyal to God that even at the threat of death, they will not give up their value system. Obviously, you rapidly see the application for you and I in this wicked world that we are living in. And you see as persecution is mounting with regards to censorship of Christian thought and expression on social media, and et cetera, the conservative viewpoint is really being pressed down. But you can see how we could easily, within our lifetime, we could see a time when our lives would be threatened because of the value system of God. And the question is, do we love our lives more than the values of God, which could cost us our lives. Frankly, as I look around and I see some of what's happening in the church today, I have to be honest with you. There are many of my fellow Christians who I just don't think are going to make it. We have been softened up by all kinds of false teaching and false assumptions that we've made into conclusions, such as this pre-trib rapture thing. I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but we got to stop preaching it as if that is the grand hope, that is going to happen before we ever go through any trouble. It is my hope that Jesus will return. It's the great hope that he'll return and take me out of here. But the timing has to be, we got to be careful when we preach the timing in such a manner. As we do that, then, coming through here, then I want to see, he's going to say, they love not their lives even unto death. They were willing even to die for that situation. Wow. So I believe we are transitioning here to our third conflict, and that's the dragon in the church. He's gonna say something that's rather sobering here at the conclusion. Therefore, because of this, what's going on, it has taken place with the dragon, etc. He says, because of this, he says, rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. So if you're in the heavenly realm, rejoice. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short. He knows that his time is short. And so Satan understands the timeline, and he recognizes, and I believe right now in the church age, he understands that his time of ruling this planet is very, very short. Now, however you go with your eschatology, if you believe, as the present millennialists do, a lot of folks, uneducated folks, call them the amillennialists, if you believe that Jesus is going to come back and that's the end of all things, Satan's time is short. If you believe that Jesus is going to come back and he's going to reign for 1,000 years, then his time is short. Either way you go with your eschatology, Satan knows his time is short and he's whooping it up on God's people. And if this is referring to the tribulation period, not just the general church age, if it's referring to the tribulation period, then I think you see the church in the middle of it. And I think you see that the church is the great threat to Satan and his limited time here, because it's directly connected. Therefore, the reason his time is short, therefore it says, is because we got folks who are conquering him by the blood of the Lamb and their testimony. I think that the church itself is going to be one of the great indicators to the great red dragon that, hey, your time is short, because we're manning up underneath this and we're not going to be silenced. Powerful stuff. I'm not teaching it as absolute, as I keep coming back, because I don't know. I'm growing just like you're growing. But I do think that it's very important for you and I, number one, to not make assumptions. And number two, especially to build our entire eschatology on those assumptions. And number two, I think it's very important for you and I to man up in such a way that we can become Jobs if necessary. God may very well need his bride to go through difficult times to show Satan, the angelic realm, and the rest of the world, we're tough people. Are you tough enough to be part of the remnant? Going back then, the reason I've got this screen is because most of the lesson this evening, I had this part covered up, but those are the 6 questions that I tried to cover during our time together. I pray that it has been a blessing to you. All right. I see I've got several comments, and I'm going to recognize those comments and try to answer them as quick as I get off here, okay? But for now, I need to say thank you for joining me. This is Sonny Chow saying be there, Matthew 16:26.